standing on the promises of Christ my King, through eternal ages and praises ring. Glory in the highest I will shout and sing, standing on the promises of God. Stand we, standing on the promises of God, my Savior. Stand we, I'm standing on the promises of God.
I was just getting started on that song. I love that song. I think I love it at least in part because it's challenging. Each day I'll do. And I hope that when I was singing that we truly meant that is truly a goal and a purpose of ours. One of the topics that's interesting in the Scriptures, I think, is the topic of fasting. And quite often we ask questions about fasting. How important is it today? Is it vital? Is it necessary? Is it beneficial? Is it commanded for us to do? As you look at the idea of fasting in the Bible, by definition, it simply means a person choosing temporarily to go without food or food and water, and to do so for a spiritual cause or for a spiritual benefit. If you look back into the Old Testament during the era or the time when folks lived under the Old Covenant, the law of Moses, we find that there was only one day. That was the Day of Atonement. Each year that the Hebrews or the Israelites were to observe a commanded fast. In Leviticus chapter 16 and verse 31, Moses calls this particular fast an afflicting of the soul. Well, over in Isaiah chapter 58 and verse 3, Isaiah uses that same terminology, the afflicting of the soul, but he also talks about fasting, so that the two ideas are one and the same, it seems, as they're used in the Scriptures. So people fasted, and they fasted on many occasions, but as far as it being a commanded thing, there was only the one day, the Day of Atonement under the law of Moses. When we think about the Christian era, the day that you and I live under the new covenant, the gospel of Jesus Christ, we find that there is not a fast that is commanded anywhere. And yet at the same time, there seems to be this idea or an assumed assumption that there will be times when Christians today will feel the need to fast. In Luke chapter 5 and verse 35, Jesus was being questioned about why his disciples did not fast. And it was pointed out to him that the disciples of John would fast and the Pharisees would fast, but not the disciples of Jesus. And in answering that, Jesus said, you don't fast when you have the bridegroom. And he was the representative as the bridegroom, as it is used in Matthew chapter 25, verses 1 through 13. So Jesus said, my disciples don't fast while the bridegroom is here, but when the bridegroom is gone, he said, my disciples will fast. So there was this idea of fasting, and it was something that seemingly was a good thing, and yet it was not a commanded thing, it was a voluntary thing. We do find that in Matthew chapter 6 and verse 16, that Jesus gives a warning about fasting, that they do it in a right and a proper way. He noted that in that day, some people would fast and they would disfigure their face, I guess with makeup or whatever, to try to look like that they were fasting and maybe had been fasting for many, many days. And Jesus warns against the hypocrisy of that. So if a person fasts, a person needs to do that with honesty and sincerity, not trying to put on show. The Pharisees were guilty with different things, including the problem of fasting, in trying to want to be recognized and wanting to be held up as something very special. The advantage of fasting is seen in that it helps a person develop self-control and even self-denial. I have a friend that he likes to drink Cokes, but he'll go for months without drinking one because he wants to make sure that he's not addicted to it. Well, I think it's somewhat of that idea. But I don't know whether you know it or not, but I personally fast every day. I fast from breakfast to lunch, and then from lunch to supper or dinner, and then from that to my before-bed snack. And then from that, doesn't mean much, does it? What you have is fasting, but really no benefit and no sacrifice. I use this idea of fasting to make this point, hopefully this morning. There's a need for us to make sure that we are, as Christians, being willing to sacrifice. In Matthew chapter 16 and verse 24, he says, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. So there is a place for self-denial. There's a place for sacrifice. What about obedience without sacrifice? Would that not be somewhat like fasting, just from one meal to the next? We live in a day where seemingly more and more people want a religion that really doesn't cost anything. We see in the world people that want to go to heaven, but really don't want to make any particular sacrifice in order to do that. There are those that want to be recognized as Christians, and yet do not want to make a personal sacrifice, give up anything in order to do that. I wonder if you and I are somewhat that way. Is it possible that we are looking for something free? That we're looking for something that doesn't cost anything? That we really want to be considered a Christian? We want to be considered faithful? We want to be considered in that group that will go to heaven someday and hear Jesus say, well done, and yet not be willing to give Him of our very best? If that is my position, I think that I need to think carefully about the fact that God has done everything for me. As Seaburn mentioned in his prayer a minute ago, the blessings that we have, everything that we have, every good gift and every perfect gift comes down from above. It comes from God Himself. In John 3:16, for God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in Him should not perish, but have everlasting life. God gave Jesus so that you and I might believe and be saved. In Philippians chapter 2, beginning with verse 5, it tells us that Jesus was obedient even to the point of death, even death upon the cross. And in the process of that, He became a bond servant or a bond slave. He voluntarily came to this earth to live and eventually to die, even that terrible death upon the cross. And He did that for me. So when I think about what He did for me, how can I possibly try to look for a free ride? How can I possibly justify not making some effort, not making some sacrifice to be what He would want me to be? I think that's something that all of us need to think about as we think about the lives that we live each day. Are we really giving? Are we really, sacrificing? In Mark chapter 12 and verse 41, you read the story of the poor widow. In that particular day, in the temple, under the old law, their giving was somewhat different than ours. They would have several chests, and these chests would have an opening in the top, and they were earmarked for particular needs. And people would simply go into the temple and they would put their gifts in these particular chests or boxes to be used by the priest and others. On this occasion, Jesus was sitting and watching people give. And as a side note, I suggest to you that he watched you give and me give this morning. Jesus is aware of what we are doing from a monetary, from a blessing standpoint. But Jesus was watching and he saw people that were rich and wealthy and they were giving large amounts. But he also observed a poor widow and it says that she put in all of her living. And it was just one or two little copper coins worth, a penny or two. And Jesus, after he observed her giving, called the disciples together and he pointed her out and he said to his disciples, she's given more than all of these others because she gave out of her poverty, while the others gave out of their abundance or gave out of their wealth. I think that the lesson hopefully is very apparent to us. The one that really sacrificed, the amount really wasn't the point. The point was commitment and dedication. She gave all of her living, while others gave much, much, much more than she did. They didn't sacrifice. They simply gave out of their abundance. So here's the question that comes as I consider my Christianity and my loyalty to God and my love for God. How often, if ever, do I really sacrifice something that is meaningful or important to me? For example, how long has it been since I had plans to go to the ball game, but I learned that a brother or a sister was in the hospital and I went to see them rather than go to the ball game. Or even if I went to the ball game, I went in late. How long has it been since you were saving up your money to buy an item? Maybe, ladies, it was a new pair of shoes, a clothing item, and men, maybe there's that particular tool, and you don't have one, or the one you have is broken, and you got that money in that piggy bank, and there's a neighbor's house that burns down. Or there's a family who has a child, and that child has just been diagnosed with cancer, and the expenses are just unbelievable. And you get your hammer and you break that piggy bank. And you take that money that you've been saving for those shoes or for that tool, and you take it and you give it. And you go get you a new piggy bank and you start all over. Nothing wrong with saving, but to sacrifice, to give of your time. You're getting ready to mow your grass, and then you look down the street and there's this elderly lady that's been real sick, and you see her grass is about this high. And you either crank the mower up, ride down the street and mow hers first, or you just leave yours going all together. How often do we do that? How many of us have plans this afternoon? Probably all of us. It may be lunch and a nap. But how many of us will go to the nursing home singing? And you put that nap off. You can take it while I preach tonight, you see. Do we do that? Do we ever do that? Have we ever done that? Again, back to Matthew 16 and verse 26, Jesus said, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. You see, we are not faithful disciples of Christ if we are looking for a free ride. If we're looking just to be a child of God in name, it is only those that are actually giving and those that are actually sacrificing at times. Otherwise, we're giving out of our abundance. We're doing like those rich people there in Mark chapter 12. We're really not giving up anything. We're doing it when it's convenient. We're worshiping and we're going to church activities if there's nothing else to do. And nothing else that we have already lined up. Are we like the person that's fasting on a full stomach? Are we fasting on a full stomach? Are we obedient with the service that is there? So we have, service and sacrifice. But what about obedience without submission? Is that a similar thing? In Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 1, the Apostle Paul says to children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. And then verse 2, honor your father and your mother, which is the first commandment with promise. Do you think that the children ever do number 1 without doing number 2? Verses 1 and 2. Do children ever obey their parents without really honoring their parents? Remember I told a story a couple weeks ago about the little girl that was in trouble, and she was put in the timeout chair, and she made it very plain, and this is what she said. She said, I'm sitting down on the outside, but I'm standing up on the inside. She was obedient, but she was not honoring her parents, was she? Is it possible for us to do the same thing in our relationship to God? That we are obedient, we're attending the services, we're doing other things that God commands and God expects out of us. And yet at the same time, we're not doing everything that God asks us to do. Maybe we're doing it because we've always done it. What do you do on Sundays? You go to church. Maybe we're doing it because it's convenient. Maybe we're doing it because it keeps us at greater peace with the family. There are some benefits. But as far as really being obedient because we love God and because we honor God and because we want to be God, why am I here this morning? Why did I get up this morning? Why did you make the effort? Is it because a family member just begged you to come? Or is it because you came to honor and love God? You see, obedience without submission. In Matthew chapter 7 and verse 21, Jesus said, not everyone that says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he that does the will of my Father who is in heaven. In that day, talking about the coming of the judgment, he said, many will say unto me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in thy name, and in thy name cast out devils or demons, and in thy name done many wonderful works? Then Jesus said, I'll profess it to you, I never knew you, ye that work iniquity. When you think about that, you think about a group of religious people. Now they were preaching and prophesying. Some of them were even performing miracles. They were doing many wonderful works. So possibly, what is the problem here? Was it the fact that they were doing it just to be recognized? Was it the fact that they were doing it because they wanted to be thought of as godly people, as Christian people? Were they doing it because it was a convenient thing to do? Were they doing it because that's what we've always done? Or were they doing it because they were submitting to the will of God? They loved God, and they wanted to do the will of God. They wanted to be godly. They wanted to be faithful. They wanted to be righteous. You see, you and I can be somewhat fasting on a full stomach in reference to our obedience if that obedience isn't in submission to the will of God. So I need to ask myself, why am I here? Why would I do these things? Why do I participate? Why am I active? Why am I involved? Is it really because we want to love and honor God? But then thirdly, what about outward appearance without an inward awareness and involvement? It is possible for us outwardly to be doing the right things, but still not be right with God because our hearts are not right. We go back to Isaiah 58. In Isaiah 58, beginning of verse 3, it's interesting here that these folks were asking God why he was not accepting their fast, why he was not accepting their service. And they didn't seem to understand why God was not pleased with them. Well, it turns out that the reason God wasn't pleased with them was not because they were not fasting and offering sacrifices and going to the temple and doing these outward things, but it was because their lives did not match up with those things. There was a problem of hypocrisy. Their daily lives, for example, it would be like a person today that maybe would attend all of the services, maybe pray every day, maybe read their Bibles every day, but at the same time harbor hatred in their heart for another member of the church. Or a person that would do all of these things and actively involved, maybe even serve as an elder, as a deacon, as a Sunday school teacher, as a preacher, serving in those areas, and yet at the same time not being willing to forgive a brother or a sister that had offended them. A person that was doing, you see, just because we are recognized as righteous and would think of ourselves as being righteous doesn't mean that God is pleased with us. We find that Jesus uses the illustration of a cup. And he said that the outside of the cup, he said, it is washed clean. It's clean. But he said inside of that cup, it's filled with that which is decaying and that which is dead. And to illustrate that, he was talking about a person's life. And he's saying that outwardly, this person looks like a good, righteous, faithful Christian. They're in church on Sunday mornings, church on Sunday night, doing this, doing that. But inwardly, he says of this group, he said they're filled with distortion. Distortion. Self-righteousness. He says you need to first clean the inside, and then the outside basically will take care of itself. He's talking about our lives, and he's saying that we've got to get our hearts right. In Mark chapter 7 and verse 6, Jesus said, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. We find in Matthew chapter 15 very, very similar words. People draw nigh to me, he says, with their heart and with their mouth, but not with their hearts. So outwardly, the appearance is there. As far as Christians, we look pretty good. We sound pretty good. And yet, our hearts are not where they ought to be. We've not really given ourselves wholly and completely. So as we think about service has to be coupled with sacrifice. Or else it's of no real service if we're only doing it when it's convenient. We're only coming to church when it looks good and we feel good and the weather's right and the family's right and there's nothing else to do. What good is that? Jesus said, what value is there to loving those that love you? You see, the real challenge is to love your enemies, because that takes sacrifice, you see. It takes sacrifice. Are we really giving of ourselves, of our time, our talents, our abilities, and our money, and doing something for someone else? When it comes to obedience, obedience has to be coupled with submission. What we want out of our children is not that they obey because they're fearful of more punishment or more discipline. But what you want out of your children is for them to grow and to learn to obey out of love and respect. Same thing is true with the way God feels about you and me as well. And then to make sure that our inward lives are in harmony with our outward lives. That we're more than show. We're more than someone that calls themselves a Christian. But from our hearts within, we have a resolve to be obedient to God in everything that we say and everything that we do. And out of that, people see our light shining that we talked about in our Bible class this morning. They recognize that truly we are the salt of the earth. And it's because we have a flavor, and it is a flavor, it is a preserving power that comes because we are dedicated and committed from the heart outward to being all that God would have us to be. As we think about these things as Christians, it is our prayer this morning that we will make sure that we're not just fasting on a full stomach, but that we truly are giving of ourselves to God. You may not be a child of God this morning, and service and obedience, sacrifice, appearance, all of those things begin by repentance and baptism and confessing the name of Christ. And we encourage you to do that this morning so that you can be a shining light for God. You can be that salt, saving, preserving power. No better day than today. The Bible says that today is the day of salvation. It is that opportunity that we have. This morning, if you need to be baptized in Christ, or as a Christian, if you need to change some things of a public nature, the invitation is yours as we stand and say.
I have resolved